managed to slip the lid of the pot
I bet it did.
to go check, make sure they're not knocking the pot down or into our chicken noodle soup. So
Yeah.
we have all these little cats now. So
You got kittens, haven't you, at the
we have
moment?
kittens, and now they're like little terrorists.
Yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
an eye on them. So,
Yeah, the little ones are, yeah, very active.
exactly. Getting tall enough to be able to
Mm,
on things and counters and
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So tonight, we are talking about flexibility and suppleness, day 2. And we'll wait for, should we wait till about 5 past before we get started, Thomas? What do you think? Give it a few more minutes, or
Sure, let me see now. We're 42.
it's got
Let's
a
see.
reasonable number.
Yeah, it's
Mm,
slowing down a little bit,
mm.
but yeah, you can probably get going. I have
Yeah,
to
we need to
finish
finish
in
at
an hour
7.
because I have another Q&A
You've got another
session,
Q&A.
so
Well,
I
we
have to
should
be on time today.
definitely get
Yeah.
started. Yeah, so welcome everybody to day 2 of the Feldenkrais for Riders Challenge. Some of you I know have already done the Feldenkrais lesson on the course platform, and hopefully found something in it which was useful and interesting. But I wanted to talk about flexibility and suppleness tonight, and we touched on it last night, because really, whenever stability and balance are in play, then so is flexibility and suppleness. So we have these principles which all interweave, but we can also go into the details of each of the principles. And Thomas, I thought it might be quite fun to talk a little bit about flexibility of mind, seeing as that's such a big thing in your teaching. But it's also a key part of the Feldenkrais method, in that and we talked a little bit about this last night, we're not looking necessarily to achieve a correct form. What we're looking to do is make a series of experiments, and in my case, that's movement experiments with humans. And with Thomas, he, if I may speak for you, he uses the arena patterns in an extremely clever way, so that they become kind of training your horse experiments. And it's a way of asking questions of your horse as you're training, how a little bit of shoulder in becomes a question about, how are you balancing over your outside legs today? How is that inside hind? Is it flexible? Is it strong? Is it stiff? So Thomas's training is absolutely imbued with these principles, which I think of as both flexible in body and flexible in mind. And they really go well with the Feldenkrais method, because you may have noticed when I taught the short lesson last night that I just ask you a series of rhetorical questions. You don't have to answer the questions to me. They're questions for yourself to get you curious about how you're moving, the relationships between different parts of you, finding new places in you that you have never sensed before, and how that might hold the key for you to leave behind some of your habitual habits of muscular contraction. So it's this type of flexibility. It's like a sort of more process-oriented learning.
Yeah.
And
definitely. I mean, the gymnastic exercises for the horses can be awareness through movement
yes,
exercises, very much like Feldenkrais, And you can also write exercises that are like weightlifting, for the hind legs, where the hind legs have to lift the weight of the horse's body and the rider's body up and, do something with it and so on. So it has different aspects, and you can take them in different directions. And, in clinics and with training horses, especially, I sometimes had the feeling when horses couldn't do something that it was not so much because they were physically unable to do it, but it was almost like they couldn't envision doing it. It's like they weren't physically flexible enough, or I thought they were flexible enough physically, but they were mentally not flexible enough. And so that was one of the observations that was the result of these crazy exercises we do, where you do unexpected things in weird places, and and that takes a certain flexibility, and you get horses that can do a shoulder in on the long side all day long, and then you ride the shoulder in somewhere else and they act like they've never heard of this before. It's like, no, I don't recognize this. I've never done this. I can't, I won't, I don't know how this works. And so it's like, some horses just memorize patterns, set patterns essentially, and then they never understand how it actually works. So they can't apply the lesson of the shoulder into a different context, right? And it reminded me a little bit of the, when I was a kid, there was this new method of teaching kids how to read and write by making them memorize entire words, but instead of teaching them letters, right? So, of course, if you just memorize the complete word, then you may not recognize the letters when they come in a different context and when they show up in a different word, right? And so that, I guess that method was abandoned eventually because it didn't work out so well, right? And you find this in horses. There are horses that know the letters of the alphabet, and it doesn't matter where in the arena you ask for a certain movement or in what context. It doesn't matter what comes before and what comes after. The horse recognizes, yeah, okay, I've done this. I know what this is, right? Whereas if they just memorize like a test pattern, for example, right? Then you do something out of context or in a weird order, then it breaks down and they have no idea what you're talking about, right? So that's really important that they understand the gymnastic elements and that they can recognize them no matter where they are. Even if you're out on a trail and you ride a shoulder in from one bush to a tree or something like that, or you do weird combinations, they still have to be able to recognize it. So that they, oh yeah, I know what this is. I can do this, And they have to be able to envision, yeah, oh yeah, it's possible to shift the weight here to the other side in this location. And it's possible to change my bend. Even if I've never done this, right? The horse has to be mentally flexible enough to say, oh yeah, I've changed the bend many times. So it doesn't matter if it's in a weird place, right? So I can do it, So that was a big light bulb moment for me. Sorry.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's in a sense, it's like this idea of working on your posture. You could have perfect posture by, you find a photograph in a book and, it's perfect posture and everything's stacked up and your spine is the perfect shape and you're absolutely evenly balanced over both legs and your pelvis is in the right place. But if you can't move from there and if you can't move in any direction with equal ease, what use is that posture? Yeah, exactly. I think that's a little bit about what you're saying. And we often talk about in our sessions that function form follows function rather than function following form. So by that I mean you can have just what I've said. You can have great form, you can look the part, but if you can't do anything from there, it's useless.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the other thing which is interesting, which I think you touched on in terms of your description of the exercises and the movements that you teach the horses, is that, say, for instance, you're out on the trail, you're doing a bit of shoulder in, you're doing a bit of counter shoulder in, you're asking the question, can you bend a little this way? Can you bend a little that way? Can you take weight on those legs? Can you take weight on those legs? Can you do that equally easily in both directions? And what happens at the end of that is your horse will look like they're in a great frame, but you've never actually tried to put them into a great frame.
Yeah.
It's the movements themselves take care of the self-carriage of the horse. And it's the same for us, is that you can trust the movements in the lessons that I'm presenting to you to take care of your posture, to actually give you a sense of length and to be an alignment through your whole self without you having to kind of, put this bit there and that bit there, and then, that feels a bit awkward, and you're straining and stressing and making too much effort in the muscles.
Right. I've known riders who could impersonate a dressage rider, right? They had a straight back and the heels were down and the toes were pointed forward and they sort of looked the part. But yeah, they couldn't do anything with the seat. They didn't live in that seat. They couldn't work with the seat. They couldn't really influence the horse with that seat. They were just posing in a way. It's like putting a Barbie doll on top of the horse and making it look right with all the right joint angles and stuff, right? But yeah, it was useless, like you said. They couldn't really do anything with that seat.
And we started to play around last night with just simple weight shifts. something which was a little bit unusual, which was the lifting and lowering of the sitting bone, but with your weight one side of your pelvis off the chair. So that is a surprise for your brain and your nervous system, and it takes you out of your habitual way of organizing yourself. And for most people, they felt a difference. And I thought we could do something similar tonight. So we could do something which is maybe a little bit unusual and surprising. And it seems like it's far away from where we're looking to make an impact. And, you know, to give you a sort of taste of that, what is possible if you think outside of the box. So should we do that? And then we can kind of continue the discussion afterwards. Like last night, it seems easier when we're sitting in front of laptops and phones to do something in sitting. Often Feldenkrais lessons are done lying on the floor, which is really nice, but I'm going to have you sitting again tonight. So if you weren't here last night, I asked everybody to find a chair or stool or something which means that their hip joints are either at the same height of their knees or preferably a little bit higher. And if it's got a firmish surface, that's even better. So see if you can find a chair to sit on. If you can only find something low, then you can make do. And you can even sit on the floor cross-legged if you haven't got a chair available for this particular session. So take a moment just to get comfortable on your chair, just to sense, sort of bring your attention inwards. We've been talking about some interesting ideas, which is mental activity. But can you start to bring your attention inwards? And if you want to close your eyes, if that helps you tune into your sensory perception, go ahead. And wherever you are on your chair, move to the front edge of it so that your thighs are off the chair and just your sitting bones are on the chair. And have your hands sort of resting on your thighs and find a comfortable distance for your feet. Probably you don't want to have them too close or you won't feel much support. And have the whole sole of each foot on the floor. So now you've got 4 places which are providing stability and support, which is 2 feet and 2 sitting bones. And a cat that provides the flexibility. They've got, it's gonna, that little terrorist is gonna jump. And then sense your sitting bones again, like you did last night, and sense, do you feel more weight on one sitting bone than the other? And if you do, is that a familiar feeling for you? And how would you know which sitting bone was heavier? Well, you could try lifting one. So just lift one sitting bone away from the chair and then lower it. And do the lifting and lowering with keeping your feet flat. So your feet will stay flat. And you organize this from, well, you could either use the muscles of your torso or you could push a little bit with your foot into the floor. Pushing down to lever your hip up is an option. And notice, did you lift the sitting bone that was already light? Or did you choose the one which was heavier and more difficult? Well, the only way you'll know is if you compare and contrast and try the other side. So lift your other side, shift your weight onto the opposite sitting bone. Have the feet, you know, the foot on the side that the sitting bone is lifted can be flat, and it can also press down a little bit into the floor to give you some leverage. Pushing down to lift up. Also the muscles of your core and around your spine, they're all doing something. And then alternate from side to side, lifting one sitting bone and then coming back to the center and lifting the other. And we talked last night about how you organize your pelvis to sort of swing like a pendulum to encourage your horse to move to the right or to the left. And this is kind of the movement as close as you can on a chair. You have got a little bit of lightening on one side, your pelvis is a little bit of a swing. And you'll probably feel, even from these first movements, that it's a lot easier to swing your pelvis in one direction than the other. For almost everybody, that's the case. And then bring yourself to the middle and just pause for a moment. And I'm going to talk you through this next movement on your right side. However, if you have a problem in your right arm or your right shoulder, which means that that is difficult for you, you can switch the directions and do this on your left side. So that's up to you to decide what you want to do. But could you take your right arm up into the air, so directly in front of you, so that the whole arm is at shoulder height? Yeah. And make a light fist with your right hand. And keeping your arm straight, start to rotate the fist so that the thumb side of your hand turns down towards the floor. And then it comes back to where you started. And then it turns the other direction, so your thumb turns outwards. And now go back and forth like this. And, you know, it's a funny thing. This should be easy. But often when I teach this, people's arms and shoulders feel tired quite quickly. And how come? How come it's tiring to have your arm up and do a sort of simple everyday movement? And if you kind of think that you're not just an arm in your shoulder, you also have a shoulder girdle. You've got a collarbone in the front and you've got a shoulder blade in the back. So in this turning of your arm, the turning can travel through your forearm, your elbow, your upper arm into your shoulder. And you can also have your shoulder girdle be part of it. Great. Leave that, let your arm rest for a moment. And now take both arms up into the air in front of you. So you've got both arms long in front of you, both at shoulder height. And start to turn your right arm down. Make light fists with your hand, sorry. Take your right arm down and turn it down, but turn your left arm a little bit up. So you're doing kind of an asymmetric movement. And then go back to where you started. And you're just going to go in that direction, turning the right thumb side down and the left thumb side up. And notice when you start to do this asymmetrical movement with your arms, turning the whole arm in the shoulder, and maybe it goes into your shoulder girdle. Do you feel like you start to, something changes in your chest? Maybe your sternum, your breastbone moves a little bit. How far down into yourself, down your spine, through your rib cage to your pelvis, do you feel this movement of turning your two arms? And do you breathe as you're paying attention to this strange movement? Great. Let your arms rest. Let your hands rest. And very simply lift one sitting bone away from the chair and then the other sitting bone away from the chair. And notice, has anything changed? Has it got easier? Has it got harder? Is there absolutely no difference at all? What possible relevance could that last movement have? These are questions you can ask yourself. And then once again, take your right arm up in front of you. Direct it straight forward at the height of your shoulder. And this time, as you turn your fist, your arm downwards, reach your whole arm forward as if you were reaching for something in front of you. Great. And then as you turn the hand back, come back to your center. So you're reaching and rotating your whole arm. And, you know, you can probably feel that this invites a little bit of turning, not only into the shoulder, but maybe you start to turn your chest a little bit. Maybe your head starts to turn. You could actually actively turn your head a little bit to the left as you reach and rotate your right arm. Let that arm rest. Take both arms up. So both arms are at shoulder height. And a couple of times do the first simple movement of turning the right fist down and the left fist up. And do that, kind of find your way into that coordination. But now add the reaching of your right arm as you rotate back. And at the same time as you turn the right hand down and reach, think that the left side, the left shoulder is going to move backwards through space. Yeah. And feel how much this starts to churn your whole chest, your sternum, your head, your eyes. You could actually kind of track with your eyes along the horizon to the left. And what does that do to the weight on your pelvis? Great. Let your arms rest. Let your hands come down. Shift your weight a little bit to the right, to the left on your pelvis, lifting one sitting bone. Sense whether anything in your chest and the upper vertebra of your spine has got a little bit more bendy, more available for movement. And then let's do one more short thing. We'll go both sides tonight. So take both arms up into the air, make light fists with your hands, start to rotate your right fist down and your left fist up, and then go the other direction, turn your left fist down and your right fist up, and go back and forth and add in your own time the reaching of the fist that's turning down and the pulling back of the fist that's turning up. And so, you know, if you're looking at the screen, you'll see that Thomas is shifting onto the sitting bone of the hand reaching or turning down. Some people will be doing the opposite. Whichever way you're organizing your weight shift, change it. So if so if you're turning your fist down and you're coming onto that sitting bone, and get off that sitting bone. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So you start to swing your pelvis away from the fist that's turning down. Great. And if you're the other way, there's some laughing faces going up. Some flexible minds are getting totally like discombobulated. And if you can laugh and have a bit of a joke about it, the whole movement will probably get easier. Bring your hands down, let your arms rest on your legs, and very simply shift your weight a little bit right, a little bit left, and feel what that's like now. Yeah. Nice change up here, I guess. Yeah. Jane Kyung, what a mess I made. I'm sure you won't be alone, Jane. There we go. Just a small kind of exploration of how doing something confounding with your shoulders can change your ability to balance your center of mass right in the middle of your foundation of support. Yeah, Karen is saying she feels much heavier in the seat. Yeah, I think you'll get really grounded through those sorts of shoulder things. It's funny how, you know, I mean, I find if I'm working a lot on my laptop, you know, I can use my shoulders sort of pull me away from my seat. But, you know, with these lessons, everything gets reorganized and you tend to get a little bit more sense of really sitting down in. Yeah.
Yeah, good. I see Caro says movement a lot more accessible afterwards. Laura says, my mind says I did it, but the body says differently. Yeah, I felt a lot looser too. My pelvic lumbar spine became looser. It was easier than to lift both seat bones. The left was harder at first, and then it evened out.
Yeah. And actually, it was really perfect that you chose to do with the reaching fist. You chose to go onto that side because it
easy.
Because it meant that you know, to do the other variation, you know, was a really easy pick. Yeah.
I just followed what felt natural and easy, and that's why I had to think for a moment when I had to do the opposite.
Exactly. And you know, it depends what you're doing. So say you're I was thinking as you're doing, I was thinking it's like a little bit like a racing car driver, you know, at certain points, you know, like that. And then it kind of makes sense to go on to the sitting bone where the steering wheel is turning up. But there are other situations where it actually makes more sense to do the opposite. So, you know, we need all these patterns to be able to have a kind of big repertoire of sort of human function, really.
By the way, I was thinking that in the early part where you just had us lift one
Mm.
seat bone at a time, if you add a forward movement with a raised seat bone, that's your flying changes aid, in the pelvis. So you can do tempo changes
Yes.
like that, like
Yes.
lift and go forward and then the other one.
Oh, that's so
You do it if
interesting.
you 2 times with each, and then it's a
Yeah.
two change, That's
Yeah.
exactly the motion. And of course you
Yeah.
can let that continue up through the spine, but that's like the center of the flying changes motion.
Yes. That makes complete sense. And because I guess then you're really kind of almost swinging the tailbone a little bit into the spine and kind of indicating, aren't you, the change of direction, the horse's spine.
Yeah, I don't think so much of the tailbone when I do it, but I mean, if you lift the seat bone, you free up the hind leg to come more forward.
Right, I see what you mean.
That
Yeah.
becomes the new inside hind leg, and then moving your hip forward moves the horse's hip forward, right? So it's like this, and then it's like
Yeah.
get into this rhythm, right? You can do it every 4 strides, or every 3, every 2, or every single stride, and that's basically it. And then if you let that continue down the leg, then your legs will give some aids at the same time. And so
I think you've just blown Caro Hosier's mind. The simplicity of the flying change aid.
yeah, but for the flying change, the inside hip of the horse has to advance because it's an asymmetrical gait. The inside pair of legs always reaches more forward. So in your pelvis has to indicate that to the horse, right? Your inside hip goes forward and the horse's inside hip goes forward.
Mm.
If you lift the inside seat bone, then it's easier for the horse to lift his inside hind leg and reach more. If you press down on it, it'll stay on the ground longer and it will be, slower usually, right? So press down on the hind leg that you want to keep on the ground longer and take the weight off on the side where you want the hind leg to be faster or reach farther. So it makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
Even if you do a walk canter transition, lift your inside seat bone, move it forward a little bit. With a really finely tuned horse, that could be enough, right? And then they strike off in the canter because you hold the outside hind leg on the ground and you free up the inside hind. And you can add a little inside leg if you want, but for a horse that has enough energy, is well balanced, and so on, that can be enough to get a transition from walk to canter. And then flying changes are like canter departs too. It's a transition into the canter, but from left lead canter to right lead instead of walk to right or left lead, right, and so on. So if you have a horse really balanced and good impulsion and round and through and supple, and then you can do your flying changes by moving the pelvis, lift the new inside hip up and forward, like the
That
old
makes
outside
sense.
goes up and forward.
Yeah. And actually, just what you did there, it goes in really nicely because this rotation down and rotation up with that side of the pelvis coming forward and up it's a way to kind of get your pelvis to be able to do that equally easily in both sides. Because that's what you need, obviously, to be able to indicate to your horse and to be balanced enough to be able to ask for both. Yeah.
Let me see. So there were more.
Where are we? I think
hold on.
We got down to
Terry. I think Terry. No, hold on. There's still more. Okay, yeah, Ricky was the haha, great one. Thanks for my first Felden rib lesson. I think that's where we had left off. And then Evelyn says, my hips feel more easy to move, more separated than before. The arm moving forward feels like giving a little more weight to the sitting bone. That's what I did. Yeah.
And that's what you did. And it can be both, Evelyn. So play around with finding both, because the more patterns that are accessible, the better your coordination is going to be in terms of every situation you're in. You'll have all these available movements.
And Doro says, I found turning right, my weight stayed on the left seat bone. And Ricky says, so much more freedom in lifting the seat bones at the end. And then Terry Dodd says, great awareness of the pelvis moving when moving my arms. Heavier seat bone became lighter.
Great.
Yay. Sissy, wow, I got discombobulated.
I don't think you were the only one.
No. Jamie says, I was sitting a little behind my sitting bones at the beginning, then centered neither ahead nor behind my sitting bones at the end when lifting them.
That will really help. It will actually really help with this movement in the shoulders as well. let alone moving your pelvis, lifting one side of the pelvis.
Yeah.
But, you know, we are where we are. Often at the start of a session, we've got a little bit of, you know, our habitual tensions are in our bodies.
Right.
Maybe you're someone who, you know, for me, I'm someone who arches my back more than the other direction. So I'll always tend to start in front of my sitting bones. But the lessons always center me. You know, actually the movements in the lessons, I find wherever I start, I end up feeling much more in my middle.
Yeah. See, Mareike says way more flexible in the rib cage, upper spine.
Great.
James says that makes more sense, horse talk. Yeah. Alia, yeah, what?
Yeah, what?
Tina says, after trying to do the thing with the arms, I used my torso to lift the seat bones. At the beginning, I used my legs, feet more, stiffer torso. Quite interesting.
Yeah, you can do both. And yeah, and in fact, sometimes if in the saddle, you have a tendency for one sitting bone to kind of slide down and fall off, then it's often the case that you put a little bit of weight into that foot and that will lift up that sitting bone. I'm not saying push down into the stirrup, but just have a sense of that foot, because often on the side that your sitting bone is falling down, that foot will be kind of flapping around a bit, or it might be the one where you lose that stirrup all the time. So having a sense of that side down a little bit will balance out your two sitting bones.
And Gretchen says, question, I can feel the tension in the right hip and lower back and even slight pain. Should I continue that way?
No, when you feel tension in any part of yourself, do a smaller movement, reduce the range, reduce the effort, check in whether your breathing is free. And if you're still getting tension and a bit of discomfort, you can do the movements in your imagination. And often with people that have one side where it's comfortable to do the movement and the other side it's painful. So do the movement in actuality on your comfortable side so that you can map out the movement patterns and what moves where and why is that easy. And then imagine it on the tricky side and you'll be amazed at how many changes you can make. But never push through pain. No. It's useless effort that takes you nowhere except into more pain.
And Sabina says, okay, back to Felden hip to get my hips under control for the changes.
Yeah. So Felden hip was a short workshop I taught last week to the people in Felden Fit. 5 days of moving your legs in very unexpected directions and lots of unusual ways. So you can see there's a theme emerging about flexibility, and suppleness is about confounding you often, or confounding ourselves.
Yeah. And Ricky says, lovely, now it is more easy in my body. The walk canter transition gets more easy on both sides. Thanks for that explanation.
Yeah.
Carol Yates says, no wonder I have problems with some of my lateral movements.
Yeah, and you won't be alone, you know, I mean, because we're human beings we're upright in the vertical on two small bases of support. We have one hand, which is going to be dominant, and we use a lot, and the other side is constantly stabilizing us in order for us to do skillful things. And then we get on a horse and we expect ourselves to be symmetrical, and it's just not possible.
And Claudia says, thanks, Thomas, for showing so I can all understand what I have to do. Good. And Kelly says, my heavy seat bone got lighter. The most interesting part was my broken ankle feels lighter and less pain.
Oh, that is great. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if you continue, whether that becomes more of a constant for you. Yeah, often you'll get a sort of almost compressed around a joint that's been injured. And these movements above, particularly the ones which free up your ribs, have a really significant impact on your feet, ankles, and lower legs. There's a strong connection there between this sort of, I mean, you wouldn't think so, but how come movements of your upper ribs can change the flexibility of your ankle? But they do.
Julie, please says, not just riding. I find walking is feeling smoother.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I mean, riding is kind of, there are some elements of walking in riding, just in, because you're following the horse's movement, and It's right, left, and
yeah, definitely. Also interesting.
It's
just
go on. Yeah.
No, I was just thinking it's just interesting or surprising in a way how loosening your shoulders and ribs loosen up your pelvis. That your hips free up, maybe not by doing a hip exercise, by doing a shoulder and rib cage exercise. It's the horses it's similar, but that and to feel it in my own body, that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Elaine says, I think you need to mention that you should not be rotating your arms, hands like the exercise when actually riding. Yes.
Well, yeah.
Of course. Arms need to be independent.
Yes, so this is not supposed to be an imitation of riding what you do. I don't think there's anything wrong with when you first get on your horse doing a few movements of your arms and shoulders to bring yourself to the center. It's a totally legitimate thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just talking about the pelvis part, that this move, lifting the one seat bone or one hip up a little, moving it forward and so on, so that's sort of the center. And of course, for the right flying changes, then, if you allow that to travel through your legs, then the legs will support that a little bit. And no, you don't do any big movements with your hands. That'd be silly.
So. Funnily enough, though, Elaine, if your shoulder girdle, your arms and your shoulders are not supported and connected to your pelvis, then you will almost like your hands will be too independent. You do need to feel a sense of connection. So you don't want a kind of sense that your arms are sort of cut off, because you need the support from your center for the peripheries, for every movement. Yeah. Which is why, sometimes if your chest or your head is not balanced over your pelvis, you can get tired in your shoulders because your muscles are having to take over the work of supporting your arms, because your shoulder girdle is not able to sit on the rib cage. I think it's a useful thing for people that when you feel that you've got the first rib is around the height of where you'd have a short necklace underneath your collarbones, your shoulder girdle can sit on your first rib, on your second rib. And when you feel that, you may find a lot of the tension goes out of your shoulders, and then you are able to be soft and intelligent with your hands without that sort of interfering tension. So yeah, there's always, you can see it with really great pianists. They have this quietness, but a total connection to the pelvis. And that's why their fingers are so agile and intelligent, apart from the years of practice. But
Corinna says, I was riding the first time after the Felden hip today, and the horse was really forward. So interesting.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Gretchen says, by the way, rode after yesterday's session and saw great improvement. Thanks to both. Good.
You're welcome. Fantastic.
Yeah. Claudia says, I find interesting to incorporate these things in everyday life. Yeah. And Henrietta says, how many times do you recommend to do the same exercise? Is it beneficial to do several different exercises after each other?
You can do how it works for you. What I would say is if it starts to become just a sort of mechanical thing that you go through without really paying attention, then you probably need to do something different, another type of movement lesson, another Feldenkrais lesson, if you like. Your brain and nervous system, once it kind of switches off, you probably don't get the same benefits.
Yeah. Alia says, I think I also slightly rotate my pelvis in the canter-lead direction. Is that okay? Well, the inside hip has to be slightly ahead because the horse's inside hip has to be slightly ahead of the outside hip. So, that has to match. If you were to bring the outside hip more forward, you may get the wrong lead, or you may get a cross canter or something, because then the horse might, push the haunches out or fall on the inside shoulder or so. So, but you can experiment with that. I mean, these are the kinds of things you can find out by making a controlled experiment, right? Do
yeah, exactly.
all the options, right, and then see which gives you the best result. If the horses usually have a preference, right, and then that's your answer. Wherever you get the best, most reliable canter depart. And then, of course, your asymmetry and the horse's asymmetry plays a role. I mean, I've ridden horses where I felt like I have to have the right hip a little bit ahead all the time, regardless of what I'm doing. That was weird. It felt wrong, right? Because I learned it differently. But if the horse says that's what he needs at the moment, then I'm not going to argue with that, And then it changes, of course, as the horse gets straighter or as we become more symmetrical, then you have to sit differently again. But yeah, I always like to experiment with these things. I like to offer the horse alternatives, like how about this, how about that, and then the horse will show me pretty quickly how he wants to be ridden.
And actually, it's an interesting thing to do. Was it Alia? Sorry if I've got your name pronounced wrong. But you can lift one on the chair. You can lift one sitting bone fractionally, and then you can take it forward and back while it's still in the air, and you can even rotate it in a little circle like a wheel, and then see can you do it on the other side, because those are the sort of movements which are really subtly happening when you're riding, but you probably don't even feel them. But if you have them just a bit available, you'd be amazed how the horse really likes it, because you'll feel much more connected to their movements. Because we don't move in straight lines. We move in kind of, a wheel. Yeah, try it. It's like a tiny, tiny wheel.
Yeah. Cara says in dance, we call those floppy, not connected spaghetti arms.
Yeah.
That's a good description.
Yeah, it's I don't know whether you in Caro, I think you're in the States. I think you have something called Dancing with the Stars, or not Dancing with the Stars, something like that. And we call it strictly dancing. And the one thing which really annoys the judges is when people kind of, it's all like this, and there's no sort of really kind of connection into the chest, or it's all like loose and spaghetti-like.
Funny. Lucy says, not up to flying changes yet, but my horse finds difficulty taking up correct canter lead on the right rein, thinking I'm probably heavy on my right seat bone as she leads off correctly on the lunge. Yeah, could be. I mean, that's always a crookedness issue, right? If the horse only canters on one lead, and it could be your crookedness or the horse's crookedness, right? So if you tend to sit more on your right seat bone, or if your right seat bone tends to be, or your right hip tends to be a little bit back, and the left hip tends to be a little bit ahead, then that suggests the left lead canter to the horse. So then for the right lead, you have to shift your weight to the left, bring your right hip forward, and then that you can hold the left hind leg down and ask the right hind leg to lift up earlier and reach farther, and then you get the right lead canter. And yeah, there are horses that only canter on one lead, and it's usually the lead of the hollow side of the horse, because they're leaning on the shoulder of the stiff side, and then the legs of the hollow side take bigger strides, so they're freer to move. And then in order to get the other lead, you have to shift the weight to the other side and change the alignment. Oh, Jamie says Dancing with the Stars was on last night.
Yay.
Pause for the movement patterns to get ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really great. Like for me, particularly the Latin dances are absolutely fantastic, because they ask for so much range of motion in all the parts of you that for sure you will get more balanced over your feet, and more of a sense of where your center is. Yeah. And it really opens up your chest and gets your head balanced, because if you try to dance with your head falling forward, it's not going to be a pretty picture.
Yeah.
Claudia says something. Yeah. Is it possible that my muscles are getting stronger only because I make the Feldenkrais exercises or do the Feldenkrais exercises? What I found, Claudia, is that often when people first start doing Feldenkrais, what starts to change is that your muscles stop fighting against each other. So for instance, if I flex my arm, I have the agonist, which is my biceps, and then I have something on the back, which is the triceps, and they need to work in harmony, so that as one muscle contracts, the back kind of lengthens, which is a very simple thing for a bicep. But when you've around your core and around the legs and around the hip joints, often you get kind of multiple muscles contracting all at the same time, rather than working in harmony with each other. When they start to work with harmony each other, you'll feel stronger, because the opposite muscle group isn't fighting anymore. So you will feel better organized. And you also, it becomes, any kind of strength training becomes much more effective. But what I noticed when I started doing a lot of Feldenkrais is that lifting things became easier. And I don't think it's because my biceps per se had got stronger, but I was just much, much better organized through my whole self. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say stronger in the middle, yes, because you're not fighting yourself for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The more mobility and range of motion you have in the joints, in the vertebrae, in a way that's harmonious with the movement that you're doing, the stronger you're going to feel. And also your spine is so strong. People think that strength is all about your core muscles, but actually your spine and your pelvis are incredibly strong structures. And they can give you that feel, you know, if you know how to align your spine and to move it in all the possible directions appropriately, then yeah, you're going to feel stronger because you're moving from your skeleton.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Jamie says, I notice lifting and pushing wheelbarrow easier because I'm better aligned.
Absolutely. And also because, you know, you'll be getting more of a sense of how to organize the weight through each foot and how to transmit the force from the foot through the bones of the leg into the hip joint, the pelvis, up the spine, and then into your hands to the handles of the wheelbarrow. So you'll be pushing a wheelbarrow from the ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the horses, it's similar when they become balanced and the muscles are working together instead of against each other, the gaits become brilliant, you know, because then, you know, they're not wasting energy with muscles fighting each other, but they're all working together in such a way that a lot of energy is released and now available for making the movement bigger and more brilliant and more expressive and so on. Whereas the horses that are stiff and crooked and on the forehand, they don't look very good. You know, the gaits don't look very good because the muscles are working against each other, and so there's nothing available for expressiveness and so on. Yeah. Yeah.
Carol's got to leave.
Yeah, no, she's got to try it out. That's good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
If it's early enough in the day, go ride.
Absolutely. Yeah, always. Yeah.
Marsha says, feels like Feldenkrais will help with being able to isolate muscle groups, for example, contracting abs, lower back without contracting thighs and legs.
I think it does help you become more aware of more parts of yourself and have the capacity to pay more attention to the sensations you're experiencing in your body, which I think is very helpful. So yes, I think that's true. And for me, I think that most of the time when I work with people, I don't find that they need to contract things more. I find they mostly need to release things or do less. It feels like that what you really need to do is contract to support. But often it's because you're not really finding the clear support of your bones. Once you find the support of your bones and you know how to move through your bones in a way that's really congruent, you won't even have to think about your muscles. Your muscles will just take care of moving you through space. If that makes sense. I think it's the same with the horses, isn't it? You don't kind of say to a horse, oh, contract gluteus medius now in order to bring your hind leg through. You think of the direction the leg wants to come, how far underneath you, how much flexion and that's all skeletal.
And Jamie says, farm is on gently rolling hills. So interesting for me and my horse finding the best alignment to navigate the hills. Lesson moved out of arena yesterday. What we will work on today on a lunge line because he was tripping some under saddle on the hills yesterday. Oh, interesting. Yeah, hill work's interesting. You know.
Yeah, I like hill work. We're a bit flat around us, but we do have a little bit here and there. And you have to alter yourself, of course.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of free up their balance to move underneath you. Claudia says, do you have a special exercise for people who have problems to bring the right hip joint forward? I should do, Claudia, are you suggesting I do like a lesson for the right hip only? we could. I actually, you know, the Felden hip workshop that we did last week was fantastic for that. Fantastic for understanding how to move your hip joints more equally on both sides. So that is, I know you're German, but your English seems pretty good, but that would be what I would recommend. And it's in the store at the moment. You could have a look at it and see whether you think it's interesting for you. It's really, really great for exactly what you're. Mariko's also got a problem with the right hip. So I do. I need to teach the right hip course. Yeah.
Yeah, Gretchen says that coach and would like to know whether you have recommendations of exercises to promote relaxation of and proper performance with the rider's upper body from shoulders through hands. Any ideas?
I mean, in our Felden Fit series, which is my program, we have lots and lots and lots of arm, shoulder, and hand things. And I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But yeah, we have 4 programs of each program has 30 short lessons, a bit like what we've done today. And they cover everything from the feet, the hip joints, the pelvis, the spine, the ribs, the shoulder girdle, the head, the neck, the eyes, the tongue. There's no part of the body in our system that we don't pay attention to in that program. There's 120 different lessons. So there's a lot of variety there. I think particularly Felden Fit 3 and 4 were the last 2 programs I taught. I did quite a lot on the shoulders and arms, which people have found really, really helpful. Yeah. So that could be something you might look at.
Jamie says, could you describe how I need to align up and down hills like sail exercise?
Yeah, I think actually the sail exercise, for those of you who don't know, comes from the Rider Makeover course. And it's a lesson in which you tip and tilt your entire spine a little bit forwards and a little bit back. I think that's exactly how I would do it. So you, from the bottom of your pelvis, from the sitting bones up, you tip your whole spine a little bit forward and back, according to the steepness of the hill. Yeah. If you're not on a very steep hill, you don't have to tip very far forward. And if you're not going down a steep hill, you don't have to go very far back, just enough that you can feel that you keep your balance over your horse's center.
Yeah, Carol says, I'm a Felden Fit member. How do I get Felden
Yeah,
Hip?
so it doesn't come as part of Felden Fit. I've done 2 short 5-day workshops. One's called Felden Foot and the other's called Felden Hip. And we did it last week, but it's in the store as pre-recorded lessons. And then we had a discussion at the end of it. So yeah, you can find it there in the store. I think it's 49 euros, so it's not expensive.
And Corina says, I sometimes have an idea for which movement I can use a Feldenkrais lesson movement, but often I ask myself, how can I use it to help my horse and myself?
I think try it out, don't you? That's what I always do. I try it out. What's the worst that can happen? You know, it's not, the movements are small and gentle and subtle. And if your horse, as Thomas always says, if your horse gets worse, then he's given you the answer, or she.
Right. Let's see here. Janine says, is the hip course in isolation or part of the series? I have movement okay, but right leg is dominant, fractured.
So the hip course is in isolation. Yeah. We did the discussions in the Felden Fit Facebook group, which is where everybody is. But yeah, the Felden hip is in isolation. In some ways, it's part of a series because I'm working my way up. So we started with the feet and then the hip, but they're 2 separate courses, Felden foot, then Felden hip. People have asked for shoulders next. Some people have asked for ribs. Yeah.
Yeah, Alia is saying, I've been frustrated for a long time because my right hip just wants to stay hiked up, so I lose a sense of balance and connection, and sometimes my right stirrup. just doing these few sessions has made my left seat bone more interested in participating. 12 herniated discs, whoa, 6 in my neck, 6 in my lumbar spine. Gives me plenty to work with. I'm doing groundwork at this point in Alesia's recovery. And notice I do the same habits with my pelvis on the ground. Yeah, very cool. Marsha says, with regard to not contracting muscles versus isolating, can you, Thomas, describe a half hold within his body musculature as an example of not contracting but releasing muscles?
Yeah, well, you might contract muscles to do a half hold.
Yeah, it depends on, I mean, so many different ways you can do it. You know, half hold could be stepping in the stirrup, and it could be sinking down with your weight. You know, if you just sink down, maybe you're releasing muscles so that you make yourself heavier in a sense and take advantage of the downward swing of the horse's back. Sometimes, you know, with some horses, hugging and holding with both legs can help, you know, but that's more of a contraction, and stopping your pelvis from moving can be part of it. Of course, you can close your fingers and use the weight of the head and neck and send that into the hind leg that you want to half hold into. And you can combine it, right? You can combine stirrup and rein, stirrup and your weight and the rein. There's all kinds of alternatives in a sense. And if you play around with it and try different options, again, the horse will show you which one feels best to him, which one is most comfortable for him. You know.
There's just one Q&A. We've got only a minute, but there's one in the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah.
Toby
says, if my right hip tends to fall off to the right, my chiropractor consistently says my right hip is elevated. Will putting weight in my right foot be enough to correct this, or are there other exercises I should do?
Well, Toby, what I would suggest is try the free lessons that we've given you this week. See if those actually help at all. And also the little ones we've done within the thing. And then I think you'll get your answer about whether this type of work will help your problem. I don't know if putting weight in your right foot will be enough. Probably not, but it might in the moment. Because those are kind of little strategies that you use in the moment when you're riding and you notice that you're falling down one side of the saddle. You can just go, oh, touch a foot. But you want to do stuff in between, which is working with you being able to move your body in all the directions that you want with equal ease. And that's a more longer term project. So we need these sort of quick strategies that we can use in the moment. And we need to, I think, as riders, we need to have a commitment to some sort of movement practice. Yeah. All questions, because Thomas has got to go to another live, all questions that I haven't answered and Thomas hasn't answered, go into the Facebook group. Rebecca Prada, that's a really interesting question. Ask it in the Facebook group. Lucy, ask that about yesterday's lesson. And Marie, ask about the contractions of the muscles, and I'll try and get to them all. I may not get them all to all tonight, but I will at some point. So anything that hasn't been answered, please go ahead and ask it in the Facebook group, and we'll just tag us.
Yep. So yeah, sorry, I have to run, but yeah. Q&A.
Great to see you all, and see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow for coordination and awareness.